Hello, my name is Ewan McGahey, and today in Enterprise Law we are doing the regulation of electricity and energy. And the idea that I want to start with today is this quote from Thomas Edison, one of the pioneers of the light bulb and the first electric power station in central London near Holborn. He said in 1879 that we will make electricity so cheap that only the rich will burn candles. And of course electricity powers so many of the things in our world today, the light bulb that's sitting above me, the laptop that I'm speaking to you on, and it's going to power even more things in the very near future. Almost all the transport is set to be electrified, most of the heating that we rely upon, and so it's fundamentally important to the modern world and modern civilization. And I think that the trajectory that we're on is going to go even further than even Thomas Edison was predicting in 1879, because when we look at the charts, particularly for the generation of renewable energy from which electricity comes, we see the costs of solar power, of wind power declining logarithmically. According to something a bit like Moore's law, which is the development of computer chips doubling and doubling and doubling in processing power every few years. And we can see the same trends taking place with the cost reduction of renewable energy, not so with gas and oil and coal. I think that's very important. That's what the chart on the right shows. And on top of that, we can also see the same trends in cost reduction logarithmically when we look at the development of battery power. So batteries are becoming cheaper and they're becoming more efficient in exactly the same way as renewable energy. So if we just take, for example, what's happening now in Britain, a new gigapark is being built for £1 billion, which will have the generating capacity of 8 gigawatt hours at Wilton Teesside, which could power 115,000 homes for a week in the UK. It's an enormous battery installation, which is really important when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And the current price of building that power station is £125 per kilowatt hour, or $167 American dollars. But costs are predicted to keep on dropping, and by 2030 Bloomberg New Energy predicts that we'll probably get to $60 per kilowatt hour, which would translate into £44. And when we run the numbers, that would essentially mean that we could build enough battery capacity to power all 28 million homes in the UK at a price of £86 billion. Now that might sound like a lot of money, but spread that out over 5 years, 10 years, the costs seem to become very manageable. And if we compare that to a nuclear power station that's being built in the UK, Hinkley C, it's costing £46 billion to power 7 million homes. And so this is the relevance of the deployment of renewable energy for potentially people's bills, and also we can be looking in the near future to a society where energy approaches something like zero marginal cost of production. So what we're going to talk about over the next through these videos on electricity and energy is the following: that we're rapidly approaching a zero marginal cost energy system. And what that means by zero marginal cost is that supplying electricity to one more household or one more person approaches closer and closer to zero. And that's true particularly as we get closer to 100% clean energy and the deployment of enough battery power for when, as I say, when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. So in this topic, the key issues, I think, are these. First of all, what is possible or what needs to be done, particularly through the law, to accelerate the rollout of clean energy as fast as technology allows? Secondly, who should have voice in the energy enterprises that are in charge of distributing the electricity that we're going to rely on. And thirdly, what kind of rights should people have in terms of choice, in terms of the price that they pay, and the standard of supply when they're customers and bill payers in the UK and indeed Europe and right around the world. So as usual, we're going to run through history, look at human rights, relevant market failures, how the sector is financed, not just through debt and equity, but also not paying for climate damage, the state subsidies involved, and the relevance of natural monopolies, governance, including the setup of the regulators, Ofgem in particular, the voice that stakeholders have, special insolvency rules, and finally look at the enforceable rights that bill payers and consumers have to prices, supply, and this question, which is already happening in Australia, of how soon we can get to a right to free energy. Okay, so let's begin with some history, and as usual, let's have a think for a moment about how the technology has shifted in the generation of energy over the centuries. So actually, it's a bit like we've come full circle, or like a loop, because when you go back to ancient societies, believe it or not, the main sources of power were water and windmills. So, in ancient cities in Babylon, you had vast hydraulic systems which would provide power for milling. Windmills did much the same. But as we know, in the Industrial Revolution, we had the invention of the steam engine, and coal in particular powers steam engines to produce energy. And eventually this is what becomes the source of the generation of electricity, coal-fired power stations at the beginning. And then you've got gas, of course, as well. So we go from water and windmills to steam and fossil fuels. And now we're coming back to wind and water. So hydroelectricity has been around for quite a while, but really in the last 20 or 30 years, we've got the rapid deployment of wind turbines, and added to that, we've also got solar technology, which is becoming decisive, particularly in the global south, to get access to cheap electricity, and we've got batteries, all of which can be manufactured at a much, much lower cost than the cost of extracting fossil fuels from the ground. Okay, so those are the technological shifts. And in terms of institutions, first of all, we can start our story with societies where there was early water power. So as I said, water mills were very common. In fact, a water mill, the sort of good, even ancient or medieval technology, was capable of harnessing up to 22% of energy in a river or a stream that goes by. When you look back at the Domesday Book in 1086, the sort of survey that William the Conqueror got everyone to fill out to try and make people pay more taxes, it was recorded that there was one water mill for every 50 households. So that gives you an indication of how widespread this early form of water power was. And of course, people had observed electricity for a long time. People could see the lightning in the sky. People wrote about electric fish in the Nile. But there wasn't really a proper scientific understanding of electricity until the 18th century. And the first, really famous experiment based on observations to do with something called Leyden jar was Benjamin Franklin, who showed with a kite and a key in a lightning storm, not to be recommended, not very sensible. He observed that what lightning was through transmission of electricity through the kite and jumping to a key was in fact an electric charge. So this was the beginning of a more scientific understanding of electricity. Luigi Galvani in 1791 theorized that muscle neurons, in our body, function through electric charges. In 1800, Volta came up with the first electric battery, and of course that gives the name to the scientific term for electric charge, which is volt. And in 1827, Ohm came up with an electric circuit. But even though in the early 19th century there was an understanding of what electricity was, that there wasn't yet the development of an easy way to turn electricity into something practical, particularly lighting. The first electric lighting was only in 1867, but it was, super bright, and so it wasn't until 1878 that we got the first light bulb. And so that meant in the early deployment of networked energy systems, it was gas that took the lead. So in 1792, William Murdoch first came up with a way to have lighting from gas in people's homes. In 1812, through the development of these ideas, the first Royal Charter was given to a gas and light and coking company. And so gas lighting was significantly ahead of electric lighting in the 19th century. You had regional monopolies developing with these new companies in different parts of the City of London or around London. And places that were profitable to serve. And councils began to get powers to regulate the gas lighting companies. So the Lighting and Watching Act of 1833 gave councils explicit powers to light gas lamps that were being put up in the streets by the gas companies. And people were also very unhappy with the gas companies for charging too much because they were really small regional or local monopolies. And the first attempt to regulate this was seen in the Gas Works Clauses Act of 1847. This set dividend caps that the companies could take to 10%. That led, by the way, gas companies to shift around their equity to debt ratios in order to be able to maximise the amount of dividends that they could pay out. And then then the limits were put down to 7% and then to 4% as the legislature or the government tried to respond to the game that the gas companies were playing, converting loans into shares. The Metropolitan Gas Act of 1860 formalised this idea that each gas company had a local monopoly on an area which they served. Really bad regulatory idea because lo and behold that led to an increase in prices that people paid. This is what people were really stuck with, gaslighting, and really from the start, because of the way that the monopolised system through private enterprise, under government regulation, but still fundamentally private ownership and distribution to shareholders, people were unhappy with the amount that they were paying. So it was in 1878 that the Swan light bulb was invented. Joseph Swan is generally seen as the inventor, but then you also had a man called Thomas Edison over in America, who also laid claim to having invented another type of light bulb. They had a dispute over who should have the right to a patent on the light bulb, but they resolved their differences and founded the Edison and Swan United Company together. So that was really the beginning of the electric system growing up and developing, and the benefits being spread. The Electric Lighting Act of 1882 gave councils the power to dig up streets, to lay down electric cables. There was provision for prices to be regulated, because you can't just leave this stuff to a market. That was already seen in the 19th century, setting maximum prices. They had the companies had duties of non-discrimination in the terms that they gave to customers, and really interestingly, already then it was seen that maybe public ownership would be a good idea. So there was a right for councils in the initial act, although this was watered down later, councils to buy out the electricity companies that were set up. And then we have Edison's Holborn Viaduct power station, coal burning to produce electricity, being built from 1882 to 1865. And you can see a picture of it down there in the bottom right. And of course, that's Benjamin Franklin at the top and light bulb in the middle. So you have the gas companies, you've got the electricity companies, and a combination of these are serving people in London and around the country. The Electricity Supply Act of 1926 was a further attempt to regulate the industry better and more in favour of consumers, set fairer prices, have regulation of the terms at which people were served, and it set up a central electricity board appointed by the Secretary of State, and in an attempt to reduce the amount of sort of cutthroat competition, the idea behind the act was to create, through mergers, bigger companies that would be more stable in the supply. And the idea was that if you have bigger companies, they would have greater economies of scale, they could be more efficient, and that might be a way to reduce prices. It was very, very far away from public ownership and in the interests of bill payers. But that didn't stop critics within Parliament. Sir Charles Wilson notably said that the Act out-Herods Herod in its socialism and drama. He said it was spoliation also. But it was very far away from actually having anything like a socialist approach to electricity deployment. The national grid was completed by 1938 by these larger companies, the greater investment that they were able to deploy. But still people were very unhappy with the way that electricity was working and the prices that they were being charged. Now, if we jump over to the United States, it's instructive to look at what happens there, not just because the United States was big and one of the early industrial pioneers, and of course that's where Thomas Edison was from, but also because of the relevance that their story has to international law. So in the United States, unlike the UK, you had a US Supreme Court that was highly reactionary, highly conservative after the US Civil War. Perhaps always has been. They struck down democratic legislation. They, as they still do, based on theories which they invented themselves. One of the important steps in the story in the post-war period, although the US Supreme Court was striking down every conceivable social and economic right, from the civil rights cases through to Lochner in New York up until the New Deal, an important exception was from a decision called Munn and Illinois in 1877. And here the Supreme Court held that if property is affected with the public interest, it could be regulated by states or the federal government. So very gradually, you had states like Wisconsin setting up public utility laws and the regulation of prices. And they did that in 1907. But the system was pretty chaotic, and private companies in the United States were notoriously bad at connecting people to the electricity grid if they lived in rural villages, towns. Only 10% of homes were deemed to be economic to connect by the private electricity companies before the Rural Electrification Act of 1936. And so what this act did is it took the view that, well, if the private companies aren't going to connect people, the federal government is going to subsidise and encourage the creation of electricity cooperatives, and it's going to fund the creation of a national grid. So through the programme of the Rural Electrification Act, you went from 3% of farm homes being connected to 90% by 1959. And Shaver, in an important article in 2010, explains how the experience of rural electrification and also the distribution of the polio vaccine, which private companies wouldn't do, led into this idea that there should be a positive duty on government as a right to distribute the benefits of technology or distribute the benefits of science, because private enterprise and markets were not always going to do it by themselves. And of course, it wasn't true that it was unprofitable to connect people in rural environments. Electricity cooperatives worked on a perfectly sound and stable financial basis once they were up and running. So this idea that there is a right to the benefits of science was codified into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 27, when it was announced, or when it was released by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. So the right to the benefits of science comes from the experience of rural electrification in America and also the distribution of the polio vaccine. Okay, now back to the UK. After the Second World War, the Labour government was elected with a commitment to win the peace and as part of its plan to build a better society at home, there was a programme of public ownership being rolled out, including the Electricity Act of 1947, which transferred 600 plus council-run electricity companies and private company suppliers to 15 regional or area electricity boards around the country. And there was also a central electricity generating board to coordinate them, introduced about 10 years later in 1957. Same or similar thing with gas. So the Gas Act of 1948 transferred 1,064 gas companies to 12 new gas boards. All of these boards would be appointed by the Secretary of State. And there was no real involvement for the workers of the gas and electricity companies or the bill payers. This followed a theory that we'll see later more of when we do transport from Herbert Morrison, that, well, maybe you might want to consult with unions, maybe you want to consult with consumer groups, but they shouldn't get any votes because the experts in Whitehall should appoint experts on the boards of directors. And of course, the people who end up appointing both of those groups was supposedly the biggest expert, the government minister like Herbert Morrison, or in this case, Gaitskell. Even where workers had been on boards of gas companies like the South Metropolitan Gas Company, set up under an 1890 Act, they were removed under Labour's nationalisation plan. It was top-down control from Whitehall. Definitely an advance compared to privatised system, but with this big sort of a blind spot of not having worker and bill payer involvement from the start of nationalisation. The system was rationalised in the Gas Act of 1972. This merged area boards into one British Gas Corporation. There was duty to supply reasonable demand. Revenues under the publicly owned structure were meant to be not less than sufficient. So that's the idea that British Gas as a public entity wasn't meant to make a profit. It was trying to aim to break even, or if it made small profits, those would be deployed back into the service. But then the pendulum swung after the election of Margaret Thatcher. She passed the Gas Act of 1986 and the Electricity Act of 1989, which privatised the sectors. And the theory behind this was, to quote the beg your pardon, I almost said Communist Manifesto, Conservative Manifesto of 1987, was that competition, quote, forces the economy to respond to the needs of the consumer. If the industry was subject to proper regulation. And of course, that was a nice theory, but where was the competition in the electric grid? Where was the competition in the gas grids? You might theorise that there would be competition for takeovers of private companies, but that didn't really happen very much when we look at the electricity grid, which was transferred to National Grid PLC, shares sold off, listed in 1995. You still had to have a regulator to oversee the system. So even though privatization was, supposedly about competition, this is very, very far away from competition for other goods and services that we usually leave to the market, like the production of cups or pens. It was always a regulated market, and that regulation did not necessarily work in the way that it was planned. So you had Ofgem, Director generals is what they were called at the beginning, but the regulator became known as Ofgem, the Office for Gas and Electricity Markets. And it basically has powers, as it was set up and still does today, to license energy companies and set the terms on which they trade, which also includes price controls. So let's think about the human rights that are related to this topic. First of all, we've got the right in the Universal Declaration, which we just talked about, to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. So that's found in international law in the Universal Declaration and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Article 15, which binds the UK because we signed up to it and ratified it as an international treaty. Secondly, because of the continuation of fossil fuel use in our electricity and energy system, notably coal and gas, although coal is almost gone. But also the burning of wood pellets, very important. There is the huge existential question of climate damage. And so this is intimately relevant to the right to life, as we talked about in the natural resources video. The European Court of Human Rights in Klimasinjurinnen and Switzerland has said that the right to life has to be interpreted as including an obligation, positive obligation on member states to cut greenhouse gas emissions in line with nationally determined contributions under the United Nations Framework Convention on climate change. Because if we don't stop climate change, then lots of people are going to die, because global warming is an existential threat to all life on Earth, including human beings. Thirdly, we've got a right in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union to improvement of the quality of the environment, or at least it's said in the Charter of Fundamental Rights that this objective has to be integrated into the policies of the Union. And of course, there's been Brexit in the UK. This is relevant for EU member states, and it is also a pretty weak duty. In some constitutions around the world, you find stronger rights to the environment. But I suppose it's worth noting that if the European Court of Human Rights is interpreting the right to life as protecting rights relating to the environment, or particularly climate change, these sort of vague aspirational duties like improving the quality of the environment might have less relevance. Then we've got the right to natural resources. So we see this in both the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, and we see it in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, I think. I could be wrong about that. For some reason, I've got two quotations from the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights, but they both really come down to the same thing, that there's a right of all peoples to freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources. Okay, so all of these human rights are relevant when we're interpreting legislation, explicitly so under the Human Rights Act when we're interpreting rights that infringe or interact with the European Convention, but also courts acknowledge in England and Wales that there's a duty to interpret domestic law compatibly with our international obligations, although, as we know, some judges have more enthusiasm for doing that than others, and there isn't an explicit statutory obligation on courts to do so. Now, when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, the most relevant one for this topic is Sustainable Development Goal 7. And like these goals often are, they are much weaker than human rights are themselves. Sustainable Development Goal 7, SDG 7, says that we should ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. And there are several targets that are listed under this high-level goal. Number 1, universal access to affordable, reliable, modern energy. So at the moment, we're still quite far away from completing that objective because there's still around 675 million people on planet Earth who do not have access to modern energy. Second, the goal is to increase renewables energy share in the total in the statistics on total final consumption, and it looked like there was some progress from 2016, 16.7%, up to 2020, 19.1%. And it's 29% of electricity, but as we're about to see, that percentage has gone down. And then finally to double the rate of improvement of energy efficiency. And these goals are not really anything difficult. We should easily be able to exceed them. That they're pretty vague, especially targets 2 and 3. Universal access is, of course, a very concrete target. But of course, that is no less than what we should expect from international human rights, like the right to the benefits of science. Here's a chart showing the statistics, the latest statistics that we've got on the share of renewable energy in total final consumption of energy. So total final consumption of energy is not just electricity, but it's also the energy that's used in the transport system, in heating, in other words, petrol and gas. And so that's why it's quite low. And we can see that in 2020, slightly different statistical source here, but this is, I think, the World Bank, 19.77% of total final energy consumption was said to be renewables. But after a blip in COVID, where basically energy production dropped because economic activity dropped, and therefore renewables went up because they're always going. You didn't need to turn on the gas and coal-fired power stations so much. The percentage has fallen in 2022 to 17.9%, and that comes from a report from Sustainable Energy for All, which is tracking SDG 7, report in 2025 in December. We might expect in the 3 years since the data that report is drawing on that it will have gone up. I expect it very much has, but it does indicate to you the enormous challenges we've got to deploy clean energy as fast as technology allows. Now, what market failures are there when we look at the energy system? I think there are at least 5 or 6 main ones. First of all, we've got a tendency of energy companies towards monopoly. And the main reason for this is that if you want to build a new coal-fired power station, a new gas-fired power station, the entry barriers are very high because the capital costs are very high. And it's not like anybody can just start a business, build a coal-fired power station. You need to be a pretty big company or you need to be the government. And because these capital costs are very high, barrier entries are very high, and so the industry is likely to tend towards monopoly or at least concentrate. The same is not true for renewable generation because the technology and the materials for solar panels, for wind turbines are much, much, much more abundant. So it's simply the case that renewables are more competitive than traditional fossil fuel sources of energy. Secondly, we've got natural monopolies from network effects in the transmission and distribution of electricity or gas, the grids. In other words, it makes no sense at all to have 2 competing electricity grids. What we need is one grid. There is a natural monopoly. And basically, if you want to know the difference in a nutshell between transmission and distribution, you have high voltage, high power transmission, which gets converted into lower voltage distribution before the electricity reaches your home. So if you think about what's powering a laptop, there's a lower voltage than the big cables that send electricity from the wind turbines or the power stations to the local grid, which then is converted and sent to your home. So a basic point is that these networks are natural monopolies. You only need one of them. It's cheaper for one firm to provide the service than it is for many competing firms. Third thing is that in the retail end of energy distribution, there is unequal bargaining power and also asymmetric information between companies that provide power and consumers who are buying power. And there's also all sorts of things that we could add. Consumers are often irrational. Bill payers are irrational when they're trying to figure out what is the best energy tariff for them. We are irrational in the fact that we often stick to the energy provider that we're with, even if switching to another energy provider would make us better off. But fundamentally, we've got almost no power to negotiate different terms. We are given terms by the few providers that there are on the market, and we're told to take the terms or leave them. Fourthly, we've got negative externalities. The pollution from coal and oil and gas causes climate damage. And very simply, when you've got power companies that are not paying for the external effects of their production, it's a negative externality. They can artificially lower their prices, and that means that we get an overproduction of polluting activity. And so if you just leave these things to the market, it's a very big failure. Fifthly, we've got public goods in a very small way. Probably doesn't matter too much for this topic, but say street lighting and power for street lighting. It's a public good. It's non-rivalrous, non-excludable, unless you tell people they can't walk down this street or that street. So there's an element there of market failure. And finally, we have inflation and unemployment, which often accompanies it, from the continued use of coal, gas and oil. And the most recent example of this is the energy crisis, which led to a cost of living crisis from 2022 because of the volatility in the international gas markets after Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine in his appalling illegal war. That sent energy prices up greatly, and so it is something that is inherently part of a fossil-fueled system of energy. If you have renewables, there is, which can be produced by wind turbines at home, solar panels at home, battery storage at home, then you don't need to rely on the international flows of gas and oil and coal, which are often controlled by dictators. So that is another major market failure, which accompanies the electricity and energy system. Okay, so now let's talk about the finance of electricity and energy. And there are four things that we want to look at. So not only is electricity and are electricity and energy companies financed by equity and by debt, they are also financed by a range of explicit and regulatory subsidies. The first one is to do with externalities, the fact that energy companies' pollution causes climate damage, and the targets that we've got to stop climate damage are very loose, and the carbon taxes which governments have imposed are not very onerous. Secondly, we've got subsidies from the government to build more renewable generation capacity. So this is really important for the deployment of wind and solar energy. Main thing that we've got is the contracts for difference auctions, which are building lots of offshore wind turbines at the moment and over the next few years. Thirdly, we've got feed-in tariffs or their successor, which ensures that energy companies have to pay at least something for the energy that they receive from homeowners producing solar power from panels on their roof. And then we've got natural monopolies. So before we get into carbon emissions and its control, this is sort of a bigger picture of our energy composition in the UK. So in the pie chart on the left-hand side, you can see in the yellow quadrant, or the yellow slice of the pie, 18% of our energy composition comes from electricity. And the brown one is petroleum and the grey one is gas. So that adds up all of the energy used in the UK. And basically petroleum is for transport and most of the gas is for heating. Then 18% is electricity. And if we look at the composition of electricity itself, this is the chart on the right, we can see that in 2019, 24% of that was from wind and from solar in the blue and the yellow. 17% was from nuclear in the neon green. 41% was from gas. 11% was really from old coal stations that have been converted into burning wood pellets, all sorts of problems with that. 2% hydro. And, if we want to get to a clean energy society, then what we've got to do is make sure that in the chart on the left, most of it or all of it becomes yellow. So all of the petroleum that's burnt in transport will be replaced by electric vehicles. And in the quadrant or the slice in the grey, all of that becomes yellow too, because gas heating is replaced with electric boilers and heat pumps. Now, electricity in 2019 and in 2024 is still around 18%. So we haven't really moved because the deployment of electric vehicles and the deployment of heat pumps, even though the technology is there, even though it's cheap, even though it's abundant, is not moving fast enough. But there has been a significant gain in the amount of renewable energy in the electricity system. So we'll see that in the next chart. But basically, we've got 54 gigawatts of capacity of wind and solar in 2025. There are already contracts out for the building of another 23 gigawatts of wind energy in the last round of auctions. 8.4 gigawatts was sold off last year, 2025. 3.5 gigawatts of solar capacity was added. And estimates vary, but I think roughly 75% extra gigawatts are needed in solar energy in order to replace all of the gas and all of the polluting biomass in the UK's energy system, and another 75 gigawatts. Another way to look at similar statistics to that pie chart, and this is showing over the years, the composition of electricity is here. So what we can see, particularly in 2024, so this is adding another 5 years compared to the pie chart, is you can see the share of the blue and the yellow growing. So solar and wind were 34% of electricity in 2024. Statistics that aren't available in this report from the BBC show that that was up to 36% in 2025. So 36% of electricity is just from solar and wind, and then you've got a tiny little bit of hydro. So really we're up 38, maybe close to 40%. And the Labour government's current Labour government's manifesto pledge was to get to 100% clean energy by 2030. And the big question is whether that can happen fast enough, but the government certainly is setting the goal of doing exactly that. So now let's get into that's the sort of technical backdrop. Now let's get into how the legislation works. It's useful to start with the European Union. The European Union has a target by 2030 of 42.5% in gross final consumption that is renewables from in electricity, heating and transport. So, of course, if we have these three things, then we're dealing with most, maybe 75, 90% of greenhouse gas emissions. And that comes from the Renewable Energy Directive 2018. This sets targets for every member state as well as the European Union. And before Brexit, the UK's target was just 15%, a lot lower than other member states. We failed to do that by 2020. We'd still failed doing that by 2022. And really what we need to do in order to achieve it, to put that target right up, is faster deployment of electric vehicles and alternatives to gas heating, heat pumps. In domestic legislation, we've got the Climate Change Act 2008, which has this big high-level goal in Section 1 of being net zero by 2050 or 100% below 1990 emission levels. And between now and 2050, the legislation requires 5 yearly carbon budgets to be set. So we're currently in the 4th carbon budget. And what these do is they say that it should be a maximum amount of megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent that is emitted each 5-year period, and that is supposed to go down and down and down. So in the current period, it's 1,950 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent that we've got to have. This is set in a statutory instrument, but in the first year of the carbon budget, 2023, we were already at 384 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And if you multiply that by 5, you get to, under 1,950 MTCO2e. So that tells us that actually maybe these targets are not that ambitious or not ambitious enough. The 5th carbon budget will reduce ever so slightly to 1725. The 6th carbon budget, much more dramatic drop to 965. And what this is really foreseeing is the rolling out of electric vehicles and gas heating, replacement of gas heating, electric heating. But there is a lot of scope, because we are already ahead, to having more ambitious targets set in law. Now, the Energy Act 2013 is another interesting and important piece of legislation, but not really been activated yet to its full use. Section 1 says that there can be decarbonisation targets imposed on electricity generating companies. So if you've got a company that is producing power through gas or through burning wood, releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, targets for decarbonisation can be imposed, but only from 2030. And it's really not clear whether this legislation is going to have much use at all, because the government, as I say, outside the legislation, is planning 100% clean energy by 2030. Anyway, Section 131 requires a policy statement on how the target will be achieved. Now, there's a lot of talk about carbon taxes, especially in economic literature, but there isn't really that much of it in the UK when we look at the electricity and energy system. What there is a climate change levy set by the Finance Act 2000, and in 2024 this was set at just 0.775 pence per kilowatt hour. So that's a tiny fraction of the price of electricity. At the moment, it's something like 27 pence per kilowatt hour. So, it's really not very much. And similar for gas, a bit higher for petrol. But it's not really anything like what you would need to have a significant impact. And also, strangely, despite the name, the government said that the climate change levy would be imposed upon renewable generation of electricity as well. And in Finis Energy and Her Majesty's Treasury in 2026, Infinis challenged the removal of the exemption for renewable energy, claiming that this violated their legitimate expectations, but the Court of Appeal held no, it didn't. They didn't have any entitlement to not be taxed. But then it's not really a climate change levy at all, is it? Because it's not simply a tax on carbon. It's simply a revenue-raising exercise. And that gives you an indication about how I think perhaps the politics of it are that carbon taxes are so controversial. What seems to be working better in the combat, in the fight against climate change, combating climate change, is simply banning the harmful activity and regulating it out of existence, particularly through the rapid deployment of clean energy alternatives. Okay, next we've got subsidies for renewable energy. So we've got these sort of broad targets which are not really clamping down enough, but then we've got subsidies for renewable energy which are designed to boost the deployment of clean alternatives to fossil fuels. And the main piece of legislation here is the Energy Act 2013 again. Section 7 provides the authority to give subsidies to renewable generators through what's called a contracts for difference scheme. So there's something called the Low Carbon Company. I beg your pardon, I've forgotten the name of low carbon something company. It agrees contracts, for instance, for 15 years with companies that want to build generating capacity. It pays money to the companies to make up the difference between a predicted strike price, which is the future predicted price of electricity designed to incentivize investment in renewable energy, and whatever the market price is doing for electricity at the time. So the energy company that's generating will get the difference between the strike price and the market price. But if the market price happens to spike over the strike price, then the generating company has to pay the difference. So that's the contracts for difference scheme. Before 2013, there was a different scheme called the Renewable Obligation Certificate Scheme. That was an obligation on energy companies that were primarily fossil fuels to buy up certificates showing that they had invested in or that they had to produce enough clean energy to get certificates, or they had to buy certificates from other companies that were producing sufficient renewable energy. And so it was a way of the government subsidising and shifting costs around for the investment in renewable energy. But when it was taken away and replaced with the contracts for difference scheme, Solar Century, which was a clean energy producer, challenged the Secretary of State's decision, but it was held by the Court of Appeal again that they had no legitimate expectation that the government would maintain support levels. So now we've got the contracts for difference scheme. There are these, just to explain about how it works a little bit more, you have these allocation rounds every few years. The government says that they're going to be yearly. And the main thing that they've been doing is allocating spaces around the United Kingdom where wind turbines could be built. So in the latest round, just a week or two ago, 8.4 gigawatts of wind generating capacity offshore was allocated, contracted, mainly a German company, I understand, called RWE. And the government is planning to do this yearly. If we want to get up to 100% clean energy, if I'm right, then we need about 75 gigawatts extra. What we really need to be doing in 2026 onwards is auctioning off about 15 gigawatts at least each year. And you can see in the allocation rounds at the bottom of the slide, which were happening every 2 or 3 years before, that there were really successful years in 2021 and 2024. So this year, even though it sounds big, 8.4 gigawatts is actually lower than what was achieved in 2021. So really important to reach the 100% clean target, that this continues apace. And if the private sector isn't doing it, there probably needs to be government direct investment. A third kind of financing mechanism beyond equity and debt for energy companies is what is known, financing for electricity and energy. It is what's known as the feed-in tariff system. So under the Electricity Act 1989, Section 6, as amended, there was a feed-in tariff, an under the statutory instrument just there in 2012, which said that if you got, for instance, solar panels on your roof and you're distributing electricity to the grid, then the energy company that connects you had to pay a fixed rate, which was originally designed to be much, much higher than the normal rate that people were paying for electricity. However, since 2019, the feed-in tariff, it had gone down and down and down and down, but it was taken away altogether. And now it's simply a market rate which energy companies compete on to win business. It's now under this label called a smart export guarantee. So energy companies have to offer a price for how much they pay you for energy that's generated from solar panels and sent into the grid, but that price is whatever they want to set through market competition. And to give you an idea, Most companies are setting a price at the moment of about 15 pence per kilowatt hour, whereas when you buy electricity from the same companies, they're charging about 27 pence per kilowatt hour. Other countries do this differently. States in America do this differently. They have their what they call net metering laws. So very simply, the obligation on the energy company is to pay generators of solar or wind power that's fed into the grid the same price as they are charging. So you get there's no difference between the two, and so it should track the market price. This has been an incredibly important way to fund the development of the solar industry. It was originally thought that if you had subsidies through the feed-in tariff, that this would create a nascent solar panel industry, and it worked to a great degree. It was challenged in the European Court of Justice in the case called Preußen Elektra and Schleswig AG in 2001. It was claimed that Schleswig getting a feed-in tariff at high fixed price was state aid and had to be notified under the state aid rules under Article 107 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. But the Court of Justice held that the feed-in tariff was not state aid and it couldn't be regarded as creating particular advantage at the expense of the state, even though the state is mandating that essentially private companies subsidise either household producers or renewable energy producers. This wasn't considered state aid and therefore didn't have to jump through the extra hurdles that the state aid rules require under the Altmark test and so on. So that was a good result for the environment, but of course the economic effect really is pretty identical to state aid. And then we've got the fact that at the retail end of the energy system, electricity companies are being subsidised by the fact that they sit on regional or, tend to be tending towards natural monopolies. And they also have very unequal bargaining power compared to their consumers. So first of all, we've got the grids. The National Grid PLC, for instance, that owns transmission and some of the distribution network. This is a natural monopoly. They can price very highly. New legislation under the Energy Act 2023 says that an independent systems operator has a goal of getting to net zero. And it's not clear whether the government, if it invests in the grid to upgrade the grid, will take ownership over parts of the grid or what the idea is meant to be. Basically, we've got still today National Grid PLC in private hands that makes regulated profits, but essentially is a monopoly. The only reason that it doesn't take a huge extra amount of money is that the price is set by the regulator. But still, that is a lot of profits being diverted to shareholders that could be going into investment in the energy system and investment in renewable energy and grid upgrades. Then when we look at the retail market, we used to have a group of big five energy companies that really dominated up until the Energy Act 2013. In 2012, £7 billion were paid in dividends to what had by then become Big Six shareholders. There are constant stories in the news about the extremely high executive pay that energy company directors receive. In 2025, it was reported that 25% of people's energy bills are going straight into profits of the energy companies. They're making enormous profit margins of 55%, whereas typical companies would be much lower, something like 15%. And from 2020 to 2025, energy companies took a whopping £125 billion in profits. And so just remember, at the start of this, I said that if we wanted to deploy all the batteries that we need to power 28 million homes in the UK, it would probably cost something like £87 billion. And these energy companies have taken £125 billion out of British bill payers and stuffed into profits for shareholders and banks. And they can do that because the system tends towards a highly concentrated group of companies that all have much more bargaining power vis-a-vis the consumer than the consumers have against them. Now, they have swapped around. In 2025, one of the, and sometimes they go bust, one of the big six, SSE, and npower went bust. These were transferred to OVO and E.ON. And as a result, a company that had been rising in the competition called Octopus became the biggest energy company provider in the UK. But fundamentally, even though the sort of deck chairs on the Titanic have been swapped around a bit, you still have a big six energy companies. And currently they account six companies for 91% of the market. By contrast, I don't want to suggest that everything is monopolized or oligopolized in the energy system. By contrast, generation of electricity when it's renewable is quite competitive, is very competitive, because even households can put solar panels on their roofs. So to give you a depiction of the energy market, this is the state of play at the beginning of 2025. So Octopus back then had 25% market share, followed by British Gas, E.ON, OVO, EDF and Scottish Power. So there's your big six, and vast majority of people will have an energy contract amongst one of those. This chart shows how one big group of big six energy companies were effectively replaced by another group of big six energy companies. And you can see around the period after the Energy Act of 2013, but really also the growth of renewables, that there's been significant change around, but you still end up with a very, very concentrated market. And the UK, with a largely privatised electricity system, energy system, and under regulation, is paying pretty high prices compared to the rest of OECD countries, or the BRICS here as well. I've got charted. As you can see, this is data from 2021. So what this scatter plot shows on the y-axis is dollars per kilowatt hour that people are paying for their energy on average. And on the x-axis, you've got the percentage of generation which is renewable. And basically, this is a proxy, I think, for how well your electricity system is doing investment in renewable technology. And I suppose what we want to ask is, well, what is the best kind of energy system? If you've got a green dot, the majority of the energy system is publicly owned. Yellow dot is mostly mixed. Red dot is mostly privatised, like the UK. So we can see that the UK is paying relatively high energy prices. It is pretty far behind when we look at how much is in renewable energy. And we can also see that the countries that are doing better have mostly publicly owned systems and lower bills and are doing better at renewable energy. Okay, so next thing is governance. So the governance of electricity and energy. First of all, let's look at the regulators, particularly Ofgem, then this new publicly owned energy company, Great British Energy. Thirdly, planning permission. Fourthly, governance of stakeholders, or the lack of governance voice that they have. And fifthly, special administration or special insolvency procedures for energy companies. It's worth sort of mapping out the basic structure of the energy sector and its component parts. It's probably already clear, but having a map might be even more useful when we look at governance. So you've got homes at the end, and they are supplied by distribution grids, local distribution grids mainly, which come from the bigger transmission grids. And as we go back down the chain, we either have gas-fired power stations mainly, or perhaps coal and oil a little bit going into the grid. But the dominant, or the growing, soon-to-be dominant form of energy generation is from renewables, clean wind, solar, hydro, or storage. And when we look at the different component parts of the market, we can see that some parts are monopolistic, namely the grids. and the fossil fuel production. Others are much more competitive, and in the UK have a mixture now of public and private ownership. Ofgem, the regulator, does licensing for all of these, generation, the grids. You have council planning permission for building. You also have the North Sea Transition Authority and the Coal Authority for the production of oil, gas, and coal. So, in general, sort of basic overview, that's how this system works. But main three component parts that we want to keep in mind are generation, transmission, distribution, and retail. And that's what we're going to go through and where the regulators fit in. So firstly, let's look at Ofgem, the Office for Gas and Electricity Markets, although in law it's called the Gas and Electricity Markets Authority, but we still use an older name of Ofgem, also because it's like the others, like Ofwat and Ofstu and so on. It has 3 to 10 directors according to the law, all appointed by the Secretary of State, no involvement of the public, for 5 to 7 years. These rules set under the Utilities Act 2000. And the key sort of Grundnorm is that no electricity business can operate without a license from Ofgem. This is in the Electricity Act 1979, Section 4, and same goes for gas, Section 5 of the Gas Act. You see the same requirements in European law, so UK law matches the European directives on electricity and gas. The Secretary of State, under Section 7, can award licences as they think fit. And there is a sort of standard model licence, the standard electricity supply licence, which might be tailored to individual companies, but most provisions will be pretty similar to the standard licence. Under Section 5, you don't need to get a licence. You're exempt if you've got generation which is under 10 megawatts of capacity at any time, and so that's sort of targeted to traditional fossil fuels, which might generate a stable amount over time. And if you are renewables, you've got much more fluctuation. You've got peaks where it could be much bigger, and so here the rules are different. 50 megawatts with a declared net capacity of 100 megawatts, and as I say, that's mainly for solar and wind, where that there are big fluctuations rather than more constant production of energy. Under Section 3A, Ofwat's duties are to protect consumers, including through the reduction of electricity supply emissions of targeted greenhouse gases. Ofgem has to pay regard to sustainable development and elderly, low-income and rural bill payers or people. Under sections 10A to E, the generators have to be separated legally from the owners of the grid who do transmission and distribution. This is what we call ownership unbundling. And the idea here is that because you've got monopolies on the grid, you shouldn't be able to project your market power or monopoly power onto other areas of the energy system. And so that's why they're supposed to be functionally separate. So transmission companies cannot control a relevant producer or supplier or have majority shareholding. And you see similar rules in the Electricity Directive and Gas Directive. Under Section 7C, the owners of the grid distribution networks have to enable access, and they have to cooperate. They have to do so on fair, reasonable and non-discriminatory terms, otherwise known as FRAND terms, under Section 10F, and we see similar rules in the Gas Act as well. There is a licensing system also for nuclear power. This is a different act, the Nuclear Installations Act 1965. It's not used very much. There are only 4 nuclear stations left. Closure of them will be due by 2035, but there are new nuclear stations being built at a very slow pace at an enormous eye-watering price tag. So Hinkley Point C will have 2 reactors on the Somerset coast. It's going to be built built by EDF, Électricité de France, which of course is the French government, publicly owned, and it was predicted to have an initial cost of 18 billion and be done by 2017, so that's almost 10 years ago, and then it was pushed back to 2025 with a projected cost of 20.3 billion, and now it's being pushed back again to 2029 and 46 billion, and who knows whether it ever actually will be done. China invested 33% in the project, refuses to put in more money as the costs escalated. It's going to be able to generate enough power to power 6 million homes, but it's an extraordinary expenditure for a nuclear power station. Important to ensure stability of supply, yes, when the sun doesn't blow and the wind doesn't shine. However, now that we've got decreasing costs for battery utility scale battery technology, it seems like these nuclear ventures are extremely pricey compared to what we could be doing with batteries. Sizewell C at Suffolk is also costing billions and billions of pounds. Will generate enough power whenever it's finished for 6 million homes. Now, then, the big story recently is Great British Energy. So under the new Act just passed last year, 2025, the Great British Energy Act, a new public company is established, owned 100% share company limited by shares, but 100% owned by the Crown. Section 3 says it's got objects of producing, distributing, storing and supplying clean energy. It should have a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, promoting energy efficiency and security, and keeping slavery and other abuses, trafficking, out of its supply chains. The Secretary of State under Section 4 can give financial assistance to Great British Energy, in other words, state aid, and the Secretary of State has to produce a strategy statement. It can give directions as well to Great British Energy. There is now a strategy statement since just December 2025. We know that Great British Energy was initially allocated £8.3 billion for funding for clean energy and nuclear projects over 5 years. It's aiming to generate 10,000 jobs. And the strategy statement's framing is very interesting. It talks in terms of the need to rectify market failures and to be a proactive investor to preempt market failures before they occur. So it's got 3 priority areas. Great British Energy Local is going to be investing, it says, in community ownership. So that could mean community batteries, solar power, wind, onshore. It's going to have a special dedicated part of its strategy devoted to onshore wind on public land, and then offshore wind investment, including in deeper waters, is part of what Great British Energy will be targeting. So it is both going to be a developer and an owner, but crucially it will be co-investing with the private sector to raise confidence for the private sector to be attracted into projects which are potentially more risky. So it's not only the 8.3 billion of government money going in that's important, because this co-investment strategy is designed to attract more private capital. It's targeting 15 billion of private money to be invested as well. Then we've got planning permission rules. So there are lots of these, but here are the main ones. So under the Electricity Act 1989, Section 36 says that if you've got 50 megawatts plus of generation, then you need to get planning permission from the Secretary of State. If it's outside of Scotland and Wales, if it's in Scotland and Wales, you ask the Scottish or the Welsh ministers. Funny case, came to the UK Supreme Court on Section 36 called Trump and Scottish ministers, and yes, that is the same orange man, Donald Trump, that we have all seen on TV. He argued that outside his golf courses, where there were wind turbines that he didn't like, that the wind turbines were built illegally because apparently his lawyers came up with this argument that under Section 36 you could only get licenses to build new energy generation projects like wind turbines if you were an existing leaseholder. And this was supposed to be implicit in the statute. No idea where that idea came from. There's nothing in the statute that would indicate that would be a logical argument. It was just conjured out of thin air, presumably because the petulant claimant demanded that his lawyers do something. And the Supreme Court firmly rejects that there was any such implied restriction on awarding licenses. But the incredible thing, I think, about this case is the fact that this orange man got to the UK Supreme Court with such an utterly flimsy case. But it does highlight that Trump, as in the case, is a loser. Then we've got Gerber and Wiltshire Council Court of Appeal case, where a neighbour to a 22-hectare solar farm claimed that it would have a detrimental impact on his land, and he, Mr. Gerber, should have been individually notified that the solar farm was going to be built when the council did its statement of community involvement. Court of Appeal held that there was no legitimate expectation that you should get individual notification if you don't notice what was going on, if you don't notice the council's proposals, then it's not up to you. It's not up to the council or the developer to give you individual notification. There's been a huge amount of controversy about renewable energy being built onshore. Onshore wind turbines, solar panels are often objected to by people who say, not in my backyard. And all of them got together to successfully get the Conservative government to stop onshore wind development from 2015. It resumed again in 2024 when we had a change of government, and it meant that a huge amount, the stop in onshore wind energy, huge amount of wind energy potential was lost. It's been estimated by Carbon Brief that 7 gigawatts of power could have been built that would have reduced bills significantly for homes all around Britain. But there we are. Our onshore wind energy is back, and Great British Energy will be promoting it. The Planning Act 2008 contains a set of rules over nationally significant infrastructure projects, which include offshore wind projects that are over 100 megawatts in capacity. What you need to do is get a development consent order from the Secretary of State, and there's a similar requirement for permission under the Marine and Coastal Access Act of 2009. Then we get to the role of stakeholders in governance. So we've got these private grid companies, we've got these private retail and distribution companies that run the vast majority of our electricity and energy system. Next to Great British Energy, which is new, there's almost no stakeholder involvement in any of these, including Great British Energy, still appointed top-down by Whitehall. And when we're looking at the private companies, remember that the standard model of corporate governance will apply if it's a private company, which is that company directors appoint their own successors, subject only to a sort of reserve removal power by the members, or usually the shareholders, under the Companies Act and the model articles. There's no right to involvement, right to governance voice for workers or consumers who are really financing much of the industry through the payment of their bills and don't have much choice because there are just regulated monopolies or a choice of six big companies for most people. There were a series of different kinds of forums in which consumers were supposedly able to participate. It's gone through various iterations. The Consumer Council, which then became known as Energy Watch, Consumer Direct, Consumer Focus, Consumer Futures, but then all of this was wound up and competence transferred to the Citizens Advice Bureau. So consumers need help. That they don't really have any voting rights, any voice, but they can go and get advice about how helpless they are from the Citizens Advice Bureau. Very different in other countries around Europe. So to give you the example of Germany, many state laws ensure that there is a right for people through their public representatives in councils to participate in energy companies. So if you take the Gemeindeordnung Nordrhein-Westfalen, which is the community ordinance for Nordrhein-Westphalia in Western Germany, Section 108 of the law A says that there is a requirement for 2 workers or 1/3 of the board of directors to be elected by worker representatives, extendable to 1/2, and the local council must have appropriate influence, usually including the mayor sitting on the board. So voice for workers, voice for political representatives of bill payers. So you see a similar thing in the company constitution for Stadtwerk München, which is the Munich City Works, which does a lot of energy production, actually is also building energy capacity around Britain, including wind turbines. And there's a requirement for worker and public representatives there. So, we've got German companies with community representation and worker representation building in Britain, but in Britain we don't have rules that give us the same community representation and worker representation for people in Britain. Now, as we've seen, much of the rest of Europe has energy in public ownership. And in the Netherlands, there's even a law that requires that energy companies and also water companies, for that matter, are publicly owned. And this was seen in a case called Netherlands and Essent. So there the Court of Justice rejected a claim by Essent, a private company, that the Dutch law requiring public ownership and banning privatization was contrary to free movement of capital. Essentially, the argument went that capital investors from other member states were being blocked investing in Dutch energy companies, and so that inhibited supposedly their free movement. Court of Justice rejects this because it was a very poor argument, pointing to the core rule on this issue in the treaties, Article 345, that the European Union has a principle of neutrality towards systems of property ownership. You can have it in public hands, you can have it in private hands. In principle, the EU treaties don't have anything to say about it, although it can be regulated. And so that was the result of the Essent case. And I suppose this is tangential to stakeholder involvement in governance, but it is true that when we see public ownership of companies, energy companies, it's more likely that stakeholders will be involved and have some voice in some way. Now, lastly, on governance, there are different rules when energy companies go insolvent to the standard rules under the Insolvency Act 1986. So under the Energy Act 2011, Section 94, says that there will be an energy supply company administration order made by a court with the objective that energy supplies are continued at the lowest cost, which is reasonably practical to incur, and the goal will be to rescue the going concern of the company or transfer to another company. And that is, of course, different in object to a normal insolvency procedure, which is to rescue a company, transfer or liquidate the company for the benefit of the creditors who become in control. What Section 94 is doing is prioritizing above the interests of creditors, the interests of bill payers and the public in continued energy supply. And in order to do that object, we can ultimately, well, hopefully try to rescue the company as a going concern or transfer to another company. So big difference of object. That is those are the rules for supply companies, so retail distributors. There is a different set of rules, but they come down to pretty much the same thing in substance in the Energy Act 2004 for energy companies doing transmission or distribution. In the 2011 Act again, and similar in the 2004 Act, it says that there can be an application to court to put an energy company into administration by the Secretary of State or Ofgem, the Gas and Electricity Markets Authority, if the company is unable to pay its debts or if it's just inequitable to wind up the company in the public interest. But the main way in which this is going to happen is probably going to be through insolvency. Transfers to another company are only to be made if it would produce a better result for creditors and shareholders than otherwise. So this is different to what we're going to see with water, where the interests of creditors are certainly not prioritised, and their claims don't have to be protected. So energy is different. We are protecting the claims of creditors to a greater extent under these rules. And under Section 98, the Secretary of State has extra powers, so they can modify a gas or electricity licence if they deem it too appropriate. And under the standard electricity supply licence, the regulator Ofgem can also put a duty on other energy companies to be a supplier of last resort. For illustration, although this didn't get to a court case, Bulb Energy went insolvent, and it had 1.5 million customers. It was the seventh largest company at the time. In 2021, it was put into special administration, and it was transferred to Octopus in 2022. So that was a transfer which ensured that all of the Bulb customers went to the Octopus companies, became Octopus customers without any disruption in their supply. Okay, so now finally on to enforceable rights relating to energy. Whether you got a vote to your feet, a vote with your feet, you can switch effectively, the price regulation rules, and a little bit on supply and disconnections. So in a competitive market, the big right that you're supposed to have that makes companies that provide you with goods and services accountable to you is that you can vote with your feet. You don't need a vote in governance if markets work effectively. But really, as we've seen, it's not true that in energy you can effectively vote with your feet, although that is the theory driving a lot of thinking behind the legislation. And in the standard electricity supply licence, there is an explicit right, it has to be put there in law because it wouldn't be effective otherwise probably. There's a right to switch after your contract ends. And so the length of the contracts expire, and then you've got to have a right to switch. Under the Energy Act 2013, Section 139, the Secretary of State can modify a licence holder's terms to adopt one or more domestic tariffs and also reduce their number. And that's supposed to be important to try and eliminate all the confusing differences that we might see if we try to look up. Very simple question of what is the best energy deal or electricity and gas deal that we could get. And what we know from behavioural research is that people fail to switch even when there are significant savings. This has been repeatedly found in the empirical literature, but nevertheless we persist with this idea that we can have an effective vote with our feet, and we try to enhance that through regulation. Because the markets don't work well, we've got to have price regulation. And so under the Electricity Act 1989, Section 44 says that Ofgem can direct the maximum prices for supply and resale, and also for customers at the retail end, there is a right to cap prices, but these are often raised in line with whatever the government approves. That's been a right and a law since the Domestic Gas and Electricity Tariff Cap Act of 2018. With the energy crisis after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, prices spiraled, and you can see in the chart how gas and electricity prices have gone up dramatically from the comparative baseline, which is set in the chart as 100 is the base year for 2010. And very simply, the only way that we're really going to get this price spiral to go in reverse and go down is the deployment of more renewable energy and the alternative to move to a public provider which doesn't have exorbitant profits taken away from investment in the system and keeping bills down. Thirdly, we've got some rules on the right to be supplied or at least not be disconnected. There is no right in UK law to get any energy, get electricity without paying a price, but the standard conditions of electricity supply say in the licence that electricity companies can't disconnect people who are pensioners in the winter if they don't pay. You can't turn off the heat and the light because obviously then people are going to freeze. And there's also an obligation on energy companies not to disconnect other people unless the company has first taken all reasonable steps to recover charges, for instance, by installing a pay-as-you-go meter. But of course, this can be pretty insidious because it means that people are automatically disconnected, and the vulnerable and the poor are much more likely to lose heat without any right or other recourse. So to give you an idea of the scale of the problems, in winter in 2015, because of a cold winter, there were 43,900 extra deaths, and it's estimated that 9,000 of these, 9,000 people dead, were from fuel poverty. In 2024, the government probably made this a little bit worse by scrapping what was known as the winter fuel allowance, which wasn't means tested. It went to everyone. It was a universal benefit and therefore pretty progressive. But it was scrapped by the Treasury and was one of the biggest causes of the almost instantaneous destruction of the Labour government's popularity right at the beginning of their term. The Australian government is doing something which is exactly the opposite and probably explains a lot of their popularity and election winning capacity. So the Australian Labor Party is in power, and what it's just done has required, through the Australian Energy Regulator's rulemaking power, what's called a solar sharer scheme, and that requires 3 hours of electricity to be free, 3 hours free every day in electricity companies' default market offer. And that's because renewable energy has become so abundant, solar has become so abundant and so cheap that it's better to distribute it freely rather than letting the energy go to waste. And that seems like a sensible direction to be moving in rather than taking subsidies away from pensioners who might freeze in the winter. Okay, so let's look at some reform options. I mean, if we wanted to fix the energy system to get to 100% clean energy, make it fairer, make it cheaper, here are 7 ideas. First of all, impose a duty on Ofgem to eliminate fossil fuels in all generation. It could be an explicit objective. It's not now. There could be a duty on holders of electricity supply licenses to eliminate gas, oil or coal rapidly for those who are still using any fossil fuels, to diversify quick smart, to make sure that we get to 100% clean energy. Because if they don't, probably they're going to be outcompeted anyway because of the massive increase in renewable energy. One way or another they're going to go, it's just about how quickly. Thirdly, restore a feed-in tariff for small energy producers and make sure that it's the same as the market price of an average that an average customer pays. So like the American states which have net metering laws. Fourth, make the grid, what's now being called the independent systems operator for publicly financed upgrades of grid transmission, publicly owned, and put it into the Great British Energy Group. Fifth, we could have a duty on the grids to connect new generators within 3 months, because one of the big problems with the grid is it's very, very slow to connect people. 6, ensure that boards of directors of energy companies are at least 1/3 elected by staff and 1/6 by bill payers. And these fractions should be raisable by statutory instrument, assuming the system gets up and running. And 7th, ensure that Great British Energy takes over assets of any insolvent energy firms and runs them in the public sector, because the best way to get down prices for bill payers is to get rid of those monopoly profits that the energy companies are making by having proper competition by a public option. And it's very likely that if you have a public option competing with private companies, the publicly run service will outcompete inefficient, bloated private companies that are sending bumper profits to their shareholders and banks. And so those are some of the ways that we can make the energy system cleaner and cheaper and fairer.